For most Australians, for consumers, for people who are worried about their life savings, the cost of living, we're very focused at the moment on issues in the superannuation sector and in insurance. In insurance, we've all noticed the jump in premiums. We're concerned about claims handling. So they're the two big sectors. We've obviously got a very wide range of work going on, but superannuation and insurance have got to be close to the top.
And yesterday you used your opening address at the ASIC Forum to call out the complex regulation that you say is hurting businesses, consumers and your work. How so, and what are you going to do about it?
Well, it sort of stands to common sense. The more complicated the rules are, the regulations and the legislation, it's harder to enforce, just to start with. And secondly, it's much harder for people to comply because they need to spend a lot of time paying lawyers very often and designing systems and processes to ensure compliance. And that isn't always in the best interest of the economy and in achieving good outcomes for all Australians. So and it has an impact on productivity and innovation. So as my speech tries to call out, I think we've now actually reached a point where we've designed an extraordinarily complex system for well-intentioned, as the speech says, but I'm very concerned to see what can be done to simplify the system and in particular how ASIC administers it.
Well, this week your commission brought legal action against Cbus, alleging delays in death and disability payments. The company has apologised and this conduct, I believe, occurred in 2022. Has ASIC been too slow to act?
Well, this conduct was first brought to our attention a couple of years ago. I think this litigation has been commenced in a very timely manner. The allegations at this stage, the issues we've raised, we believe have systemic implications. But I certainly don't think there's been any delay in bringing the proceedings.
Well, the action has certainly put super funds in the spotlight. What have you found across the broader retail super fund sector?
I think that the key thing from ASIC's perspective is the extraordinary growth in this sector. Over 4 trillion Australian dollars of all of our funds are tied up in superannuation, and the super sector has a very significant role to play in our economy. And so one of the big issues that we're focusing on is looking after members, or putting it more precisely, looking after customers. So members, we want the superannuation trustees to think of their members as customers. And so the litigation that you referred to earlier is an example of where we have alleged that there's been a failure to deliver services that we think customers, members of funds, are entitled to. And there are other issues in the sector that we are focusing on. We're looking at governance issues among superannuation trustee boards. We're looking at whether sufficient progress is being made to implement the retirement income covenant reforms that were introduced now a couple of years ago. So I think the key message is all Australians should be interested in their super, and they should expect regulators like ASIC and APRA to be very intensely involved in supervising and monitoring developments in that sector.
So are super funds on notice? Are you going to take action against other funds for similar issues?
Well, the super sector is huge, so our interest manifests itself in their role in private and public markets. They are, in and of themselves, very significant players in private equity, in private credit, in investments they make both in this country and offshore. So we have that level of interest. We also have a number of matters under investigation at the moment or subject to court proceedings involving superannuation funds and the misuse or the failure of individuals to exercise their duties properly and guiding people away from their regulated superannuation funds into unregulated funds. And so we have a number of cases going on at the moment. And I've already stressed the member or the customer service part of it. So we're talking about a very complex, interesting sector, and we're going to hear a lot more about superannuation as the years go by.
Well, in May you released a report and it looked across 10 super funds, finding evidence that fee-for-no services remain a feature of the superannuation industry. At the time you said you were considering acting, have you?
We've got a number of matters under investigation. You can expect us to take proceedings when we're ready. Yeah.
Now, the recent Economics Committee chaired by Andrew Bragg released a fairly scathing report. It said ASIC had failed as a regulator. There are 11 recommendations, a key one that ASIC be split into two. What's your response to that? Do you agree?
The report, I don't think, makes the case for splitting up ASIC. The terminology normally used in these circumstances, Twin Peaks, so your viewers would be familiar with that concept. Our regulatory architecture in Australia is very sophisticated and in fact highly respected by other jurisdictions. So essentially recommendations of that kind are really saying, oh, we need more regulators. We don't need more regulators. We have a good set of regulators at the moment. We share regulatory responsibility according to law, and the idea that the public interest will be split by splitting up the agency, I don't think that case has been made and I reject it.
So you don't think ASIC's scope is too broad and it would benefit from focusing more on the conduct side versus the administrative side?
Well, I think that analysis is misguided. Both sides inform the other. The reason we are such an effective conduct regulator and enforcer, and I have to say we are a very effective law enforcement agency. We are in court most days of the week somewhere in the country, and to suggest we're not enforcing the law, I reject fundamentally. To be an effective enforcer, you've got to understand the markets you're operating in, the communities you're operating in, what you're regulating. So it's true, ASIC's remit is very broad and it's very deep, but the critical question to ask is that serving the public interest? And in my view, the Twin Peaks model, given the size of our economy and the complexity of the issues we have to deal with, works. Now, that doesn't mean that the aspects of our jurisdiction might benefit from tweaking, but for example, there's a debate going on now about AI regulation. It'll be very interesting to see where that lands, but my view at the moment is whatever additional regulation AI might require doesn't require another regulator. We have a sufficient number of regulators, let's make that work.
In 2018, the Hayne Royal Commission also said that ASIC should be looked at being split in a couple of years if it couldn't remediate itself. So you still reject it, even though it has been raised a number of times.
The Royal Commission did not recommend splitting up ASIC. There was some discussion about it, and it's not been raised a number of times. It's been raised by one person in one inquiry. So I think I'm very confidently of the view that the current regulatory architecture serving financial services regulation in this country is appropriate and right-sized.
ASIC has sometimes been criticised for not using criminal penalties to tackle corporations or criminal action to go up against corporations, instead relying on civil penalties and forcible undertakings. Do you think there's a risk that corporations might see those fines as a cost of doing business?
Yeah. What's happened there is, it's a very interesting statistic I can share with your viewers. We actually have more criminal actions running at the moment than civil. It's a point Deputy Chair Sarah Court made yesterday. So no one should be concerned that we're getting the balance wrong. The critical question is when we see misconduct and we make findings after an investigation that action needs to be taken, that what's in the public interest is the right action. Is that action civil penalty action or is it criminal action? And that's largely driven by discretionary factors and frankly the evidence. As far as penalties go, we've finally been able to get law reform, which took effect I think 3 or 4 years ago now, which increased the penalties that we're now able to seek from the court. So it's not on ASIC what the level of penalties is. We bring the action. If we're successful in court, that's a matter for the court, and the court then imposes a penalty according to law. But we have seen, and we've been very public, particularly through what I've been talking about in Deputy Chair Court, that we will be seeking much higher penalties than have been achieving much higher penalties in the last 12 months than we have historically. But one big reason for that is the law enabled the courts to do that. And in fact, the greenwashing penalty that we achieved earlier this year was a world first. That was for over $12 million. So penalties are definitely going up.
Have you heard from the government on the Bragg report?
That's a matter for the government. In fact, most of the recommendations are for the government.
But they haven't come to you?
It's a matter for the government.
And when you're looking at the big issues, insurance and superannuation, what message do you want to send to industry?
Well, industry is a big concept, so you've mentioned superannuation and insurance. My key message for superannuation trustees is that we're watching very carefully between us and APRA. We're concerned about standards of corporate governance and superannuation trustee boards. We're concerned about standards of vendor management, in other words, the supervision they give when they use third-party providers to provide services. You cannot delegate away your accountability. We're very interested in that. And related to that, of course, we're very interested in the services that customers obtain. Among the other issues which we share with APRA is that the system has to work for all Australians. So as we have waves of retirees, sometimes referred to as the silver tsunami, that the system will work for those people, that they're properly advised, and that there'll be revenue there, income there to pay for those people's retirement incomes. As far as insurance goes, we have some very significant issues there too. A different sort of sector. But there's a big affordability issue of insurance, particularly house and car insurance. We've all experienced this. Most Australians who own a car or have a house, they have to pay insurance, and those premiums have gone up significantly. The issue we've got is, and we have a number of cases now on foot, most recently the QBE case, but there are others, where we've said to in those matters and publicly, we expect insurers to keep their pricing promises. So if you're saying you're giving someone a loyalty discount or a discount along the lines of the number of policies you have, are you? Is that true? And what we have found challenging dealing with a number of matters is that we haven't been convinced that insurers have used algorithms and their internal processes in a way that make those promises true. And so we're litigating that. The other aspect with insurance is a question of affordability, and that's a big issue for the country. Yeah.
As you say, a lot of big issues. Do you need more resources as a regulator?
As a regulator, we could always use more resources. I think the critical question for a regulator like us is, given the resources we have, are we making good decisions and choices? And I think on that test, I think the Australian taxpayer is getting value for money, and the industry funding model that funds us is getting value for money. We are, I think, making good choices and decisions with the resources we have. Having said that, I think I can say publicly that we would welcome additional resourcing, for example, to help us invest in technology, systems, processes, data, as part of our digital transformation. I think that's an area, that's an investment in the agency that I think is critical for our work, particularly for our enforcement work. In terms of funding overall, of course additional funding would enable us to run more cases and be able to support more investigations.
Joe Longo, appreciate you talking to me. Thank you.
Thank you.